Hello and a warm welcome to episode 115 of the Building Sustainability Podcast. My name is Jeffrey Hart, and every fortnight join me as I talk to designers, builders, makers, dreamers and doers. Together we can explore the wide world of sustainability in the built environment by talking to wonderful people who are doing excellent things. And today the wonderful person is Paloma Gormley. Paloma is an architect who co-runs Material Cultures with George Masood and Summer Islam, both of whom are friends of the podcast. Check out their episodes in the show notes. Now, I am a huge fan of Material Cultures. I think the work they do it's so well thought out. It's so deeply researched. The question of sustainability is looked at from all the possible angles and really forces you to challenge all of the aspects relating to sustainability. I'm very pleased to have been able to work with them on a few projects. They were the designers on the Waste Age exhibition that I went and clay plastered. I've also done a lovely, lovely earth floor. I'll put a link to the earth floor I did for them. It's an artist studio in London. Beautiful grey clay paired with unfired bricks and clay plaster on the walls. It is one of the floors I am most proud of, I would say. I should also point you towards their book. It's just a little book, but really covers all of those aspects that I mentioned. Things you would never have dreamed were sort of part of the sustainability question. I thoroughly recommend that. It's only a little thing, quick read, but so densely packed with things to sort of chew over. This episode with Paloma, I've actually snipped it into two. This one runs at about an hour, and then the next one's a slightly smaller one, but it worked in terms of content, just to do the cut there. In the next episode, we talk about clay, and we talk about timber, and we talk about land. This episode is more focused on materials, and particularly regenerative materials. Before the episode, as usual, we'll go through the normal bits. There is thanks to give to Mary, who has upgraded her patronage of the podcast. Mary is now a building sustainability superhero, which means they will be getting a hand-carved wooden spoon. Hold tight for that, Mary. I will get that to you as soon as possible. Who else is there? Jodie Adamson. Oh, Jodie is a great friend of mine, one of my favourite people. Jodie was actually our apprentice on a couple of the Heartwind builds. Lovely, lovely human being. And if you are looking for a carpenter up in Scotland, then definitely check her out. Jodie has also joined at the higher tier, meaning that I will be carving her a spoon. I suspect she's probably already got a spoon from me. Well, this one will be much better because I've got so much better over the last few years. And the final person is Niklavs Krievs. Hopefully I've said that something like right. Welcome aboard, Niklavs. So big thanks to all the new people, all the people that have upgraded. Your support really means a huge, huge deal to me. Patreon have added a thing where you can join as a free member. Now, I think that's just so that you can sort of create a community. It's, if I'm honest, it's another thing that wants me to create a community, and I don't have the time or the inclination. So anyone that is joining as free members, I'm afraid I'm not going to do anything. If you want to support the podcast, it is the paid levels only. And for those paid levels, you get bonus content. There's whole bonus episodes, bits and pieces. Last week's guest, Jules, goes on a big old rant about chalk and hemp. That's all in the bonus section. So head on over if you want to have a listen to that. It is patreon.com/building sustainability. What else? Oh yeah, if you sign up to the Patreon, then you get 10% off all courses at the Nettlecombe Craft School. I haven't mentioned the Nettlecombe Craft School in at least an episode. So patrons get a discount on the courses. Another little reason that you might consider becoming a patron. If this is your first episode, then do head back and listen to one of the 114 other episodes. My recommendations would actually be to start with the other members of Material Cultures, the George Masood and Summer Islam episodes. In those episodes, we were talking about the Waste Age exhibition, as mentioned earlier, and also a research project they'd done looking at the impact of building homes with bio-based materials, hemp in that instance, up in Yorkshire. Really fascinating bit of research. And if this is your first episode, then make sure you subscribe and don't miss out on any of the excellent other episodes we've got coming up. Reminder to check out the show notes of this episode, follow up on any of the things that we've talked about. There's some good links to products and books, people we've talked about, materials, some of the projects mentioned. Yeah, if something sounds like something you want to know more about, then head to the show notes and click through the links. And finally, if you get a chance to share this episode, you will be forever my friend. I've actually given up social media for a little while, and so I can't do any of the sharing myself. So I'm really relying on you lot to share this far and wide. I do really appreciate it, and it really does mean that more people get to listen. Okay, that is it for me. I am back at the end to discuss some of the things we've talked about. Yeah, that's it. Enjoy Paloma.
Material Cultures was founded in order to bring together low embodied carbon technology, natural materials, bio-based materials, with contemporary modes of construction. And I think there's been a siloing of natural materials over the last kind of 50 years or more into the world of kind of heritage or a kind of very niche ecological architecture. And what we're hoping to do is be part of the kind of conversation around shifting the perception of these materials and making them more mainstream.
So one thing that I really enjoy about your work is the width and the depth of the thinking you do in terms of, you know, what is the best material. It's something that I always trying to do is, you know, find the absolute best. And then I read your book and realized that I was not looking, you know, half hard enough. Yeah, I think it's really, really impressive just how broad your sort of view of, I don't want to say sustainability because I don't think that's enough, but yeah, is that a conscious thing from you?
I guess so, or maybe it's just a kind of unraveling of things. In that once you start down this path, it's very hard to stop, because the layers just keep unfolding of complexity and also I think we're increasingly kind of moving into the political context and social context that frame a lot of these ideas and materials themselves. To explain a little, the way we design buildings, so we're mostly kind of trained architects in the office. So primarily, I think we all see ourselves as designers and makers of buildings. So that was our first entry point in many ways to this kind of question of materiality, is kind of working to specify better materials in buildings. But then increasingly we also carry out research. So we do a lot of thinking around effectively scaling up these materials and understanding what impact that might have on the economy, understanding what impact it might have on labour, and then importantly for us on landscapes. We also work with universities, which I think also gives that scope for a home for the unravelling, because universities are really great places for thinking and inquiring ways in this kind of space and time to do that. So I think that's been very enabling, working with students to really interrogate where things come from and what impact they have and how we can navigate making decisions around what materials might be in buildings and what materials maybe shouldn't be.
Brilliant. When we spoke the other day, you said we want to be building with plant-based materials, and I thought that was an interesting choice of words. I mean, lots of people have different ways of saying the same thing. Like Craig White will say renewable materials, bio-based.
We use all the words, and maybe it depends on context and audience which ones you end up gravitating towards. We just did a sounding bid and exclusively used the word regenerative because it felt like the appropriate word, although that word is maybe the most complicated of all of them, and gets bandied around with great abandon, I think. So I think that, it's important to be quite careful and always caveat the use of that word, particularly because there is no such thing, I don't think, as regenerative materials, but there are materials that can come from regenerative sources. There's something very nice about plant-based, because it is what it is. It's very direct and straightforward, and but also, roots you back very immediately and directly to the idea of kind of these are things that are growing and that we depend on in many other ways, and that are very kind of simple. Well, it's not true, but they're familiar, at least, organisms. Bio-based, I always feel is a bit of a kind of cover-up, like a techifying. But again, it can be useful depending on the context. But I feel like bio-based is slightly about kind of obscuring the reality.
Is that because of the based bit? So, or
maybe.
As in, like it's it could be stuff, natural materials, plant-based materials set in some sort of resin, and say, oh, it's bio-based.
Yes, but I guess so could plant-based.
Yeah,
I think the biological, I guess, things that are biological can still be highly processed. Maybe we're getting to the same conclusion. Whereas generally, I guess the association with plant-based materials is that they're quite relatively unprocessed and just quite planty.
One thing I thought was interesting about it is the parallel to food. It's quite a common term in the in the sort of food industry. People identify themselves as, I eat plant-based. And I think a lot of the materials that we're talking about might actually come from a sort of food place. I struggle to find the right word there. System, probably. Food system.
Yeah. I mean, most of the materials that we think will probably be the most important materials in the next era are effectively kind of secondary products from the production of grains or seeds. So basically straws, but at the one end of the scale, maybe one end of the carbon scale in terms of sequestration, you have plants like hemp, which are really efficient at sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere and both kind of locking it into the soil through these very long tap roots that the plant has, but also holding it in the plant matter. But hemp is grown primarily for its seeds, for its oils, and it's the kind of waste product. Well, it's not really a waste product, but the stem, the secondary product, which is useful in construction and other industries, because hemp has this kind of dual quality of also having amazing fibre. And then you have all your kind of oats and wheats and barley, all of which have really useful straw that has slightly different uses. And then things like reed, which I guess aren't a secondary product, but in that they don't have a grain associated with them. But they are kind of necessary output of wetland regeneration. So wetland regeneration, as we've been learning in a research project that we've been carrying out in Berlin or outside Berlin. The reed needs to be cut on a yearly cycle in order to help rebuild peatlands. So then you have a ready material biomass there.
I've done that job, cutting reed, with Alan Jones, the thatcher in West Wales.
Gosh, famous Alan.
Yes, I've tried so many times to get him on the podcast, and he's not a not a fan of sort of public speaking, but which is a shame because he's wonderful. But
maybe we could join you for a reed cutting.
Yes, I think he's out there doing it now.
Oh.
I feel like that's the time. But yeah, it's definitely a great thing to do. I mean, it's in a wetland centre somewhere sort of near Newport, Wales, the Little Newport, Carmarthenshire, I guess. And yeah, so my understanding from him was that if you don't cut the reeds, then the wetland will turn into a dry land, essentially. And so, yeah, absolutely necessary. And presumably there are loads of wetlands that need managing like that.
Yes, loads of existing ones, but also loads that need to be reinstated. I think it's been becoming very clear that the draining of the peatlands was a bit of a mistake. Whilst it provided very fertile soil, it's been disastrous for release of carbon. So pretty much all wetlands are also peatlands, and the process of draining them and cultivating them for food, generally vegetables, effectively starts the process of that carbon being re-released back into the atmosphere. So you have this massive store of carbon being lost. So there's a big movement, particularly across Europe, to re-wet the wetlands.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very simple process, really, of damming and ideally getting the beavers in to do that work, because they're very good at it. And yeah, effectively getting the waterways working how they were before the ditches were dug. And it can happen very quickly from what we've seen. We visited some re-wetted, spent quite a lot of time in some re-wetted peatlands, and yeah, in the space of kind of 5-10 years, you can have a kind of full ecosystem back up and running and throw in some buffaloes.
These wetlands are being remade, re-wetted, which seems like an odd term.
I love how awkward it is.
And then, so the reeds are starting to grow and they need to be cut. So that is presumably creating this brand new material stream.
Yes, exactly. And there's a few, it's not just reed, there's also a few very exciting species of grass that include canary grass and a couple of others. But yeah, it's actually kind of amazing the diversity of things that you can do with a reed. So we've been exploring those in this work in Germany and looking at all the different products that have come from reed and that are either kind of on the market now or coming to being developed for the market. So there's kind of ready-made wall partition systems, which very simply kind of reeds bound together into kind of large format mats that are about 6 inches thick, and you can render and plaster directly onto. They're almost structural. They have quite a lot of rigidity. So there are those. There's obviously thatching that you can make with reed. We've been testing reed creek. It's a bit slippery.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't quite have the kind of same qualities as hemp. Much more awkward to work with, but still does work. And then kind of thinner reed mat substrates, again for plastering, but kind of over a stud frame. And then one of the materials, the kind of wetland materials that's been really exciting, and maybe even has the most potential, is teether or bulrush. And that plant just has a very particular structure to it. So whereas the reed is tubular, the bulrush is almost entirely kind of foamy once you strip off the outer layer.
Bulrush is the one that looks like a sort of sausage on a stick. Is that right?
It's a sausage, yeah, exactly. It's a frankfurter on the end of a stick. That's the seed head. So it also, at the end of the kind of flowering life, completely disintegrates in an extraordinary way, and then those fibres from the seed head can be added to clay plasters. And
one of my favourite things to add to plasters.
Yes, yeah. Will told me about this years ago, and it just seems so beautifully simple as an idea.
And they're so
very captivating.
I find there's something magical about just how densely packed they are and how much fibre you get from one of the seed pods. It's very satisfying.
Fibre rocket.
Yeah.
So the people are doing amazing things with the bulrush or teether. There's some kind of foam-like insulated products that look very much like kind of Kingspan polyurethane, have really good U values. There's sheet materials, which may be the most transformative things, because it's very unusual for a sheet material to be both breathable and structural.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got very used to, in kind of contemporary stick framing, building with lightweight timber, using OSB or plywood, and you just sheathe a building, which means to basically cover the entire skin with a sheets of board. And whilst that's very efficient, lightweight way of making a building, it means that you can't have a breathable building, because OSB oriented strand board contains a lot of glue and doesn't have any breathability. So there's one material that I'm aware of, which is effectively not very far off MDF. It's not a very nice material, with which you can create a breathing building, as in vapor permeable, but that also has a kind of sheathing ability, so it gives structural strength and rigidity. Mm-hmm. And we've been desperate to find more. Anyway, there's a teether version, a bulrush version, which is the teether bound with a mineral that I think is magnesium. It's quite a thick board. It's about 1.5 inches, and it provides structural strength. It's insulating and it's vapor permeable.
Wow.
So not much to look at, but incredibly exciting for architects and builders.
Yeah.
I think.
The magnesium is it's a thing I can't quite get my head around, actually. It doesn't feel like it sits in that world. Magnesium's the one that you light on fire and it burns very bright, isn't it? From my science
magnesium
class
oxide
days.
is probably what I'm referring to. So
Okay.
Magnesium oxide is a mineral. I think is readily occurring, naturally occurring, but I think it's also a byproduct of other industrial processes. Mm-hmm. And you may need to fact check me on these things, but you can get magnesium oxide boards and magnesium oxide blocks. It's amazingly kind of crisp white material, and conceivably it's kind of low carbon. It doesn't involve massive amounts of heat to process it to form it into blocks, but I think its deposits are only in certain parts of the world, so it might be one of those materials that belongs in a certain bioregion and not in others.
Nice. I like that. The good caveat that just because it's great in one place doesn't mean it's great everywhere. That's interesting. I think I just got advertised those big white kind of dry fitting blocks, and I wondered what they were, and that's quite possibly magnesium again. So they are on their own, not insulating, are they? It's the bulrush that's adding the...
Yes, it's the bulrush, yeah. I mean,
so
it's
am I
very
asking you loads of questions about things you don't really know about? Or
the magnesium thing I feel very much on uncertain ground with, but it may be... I've been very interested in it for a while, but I've never done a huge amount of due diligence to check up on it. It's just intriguing because it's another mineral that seems to have quite a lot of qualities. It was big in the 60s and 70s. So lots of people, because it's also fire resistant, so it has some of the qualities that God, what's the terrible one called? Asbestos has. Right. And it's quite lightweight and I think quite cheap to produce. So it's intriguing. Anyway, it was installed in quite a lot of houses, I think maybe in the Netherlands, and then it's sweated. So I think it absorbed moisture and held moisture in quite a problematic way. Anyway, it led to kind of quite a lot of mold issues in buildings. But I think they've solved that. So I am intrigued by it. But yes, no way an expert. And it's probably not the core message in any way.
Okay. I saw something from you which was on your Instagram about people eating a plant and something to do with bioregions. Is that where this sort of fits in?
Yeah. So I think maybe off the back of beginning to work, we very much worked, our work was contained within the UK for quite a long time. It felt like it was important to begin where we are and within a context that we have a bit of knowledge. But yeah, I think doing that work in Germany was a good kind of introduction to Europe and beginning to think on that scale. And then we have been running now over the last 3 months a research unit at ETH in Zurich. It's a design studio with guest lecturers there. And the brief for the students has been looking at bioregional systems. So they've each been given or chosen a region and a plant. And then working primarily with that plant, or at least in response to it. They've been developing construction systems for housing that also respond to kind of local climate conditions and kind of try to create places that have comfort. They don't necessarily need to be within the kind of building regulations of that ecoregion, but they need to be an appropriate response and a kind of considered response. So considering the kind of labour, what kind of work would go into the making of these buildings, and how that also what kind of work happens all the way down the supply chain, so from the point of harvest all the way through, to really try to understand the building or the design of the building as not just this kind of singular event that is completely detached from the source or the processes involved in its components creation, to really understanding it as a kind of, in a way, its own ecosystem. You know, the buildings, every building has a corresponding landscape, from which its materials were removed or cultivated or mined, smelted, all of those processes. But the kind of impact of these massive global supply chains is to remove us from those realities. And one of the kind of moves towards shorter supply chains is, mainly from a kind of carbon point of view, but the kind of co-benefit and consequences is that I think we all begin to build a better understanding and relationship between how things are made and where they come from, and a sense of responsibility in that process.
Mm-hmm. I'm intrigued by that that phrase. You were talking about what kind of work is created. Is that as in trying to avoid jobs which are kind of horrible mining jobs that are, deeply unpleasant and unhealthy? Is that the sort of route you're looking at? That?
Yeah, absolutely. The material production and construction industry is full of really unhealthy practices that put enormous pressure on the bodies of those who work in those industries, and it kind of goes all the way along the chain. I think again, from the point of extraction, many of the kind of minerals involved in our technology, but yes, also our construction materials are directly harmful and toxic to health. And there's very little seeming kind of industry care around ensuring that those conditions are better, or even that maybe we don't need to extract those materials that are harmful and toxic. And we need to find other ways to live or think about technology. But yes, and then kind of scaling all the way along to the factory and the site of production and those environments, and then to the construction site itself. I think it's become very normalised, the idea that builders will be exposed to harmful fumes, to dust, that from materials like MDF, which again is really toxic, to lifting things that put an enormous strain on the body. So there are ways of changing these things. One of those ways is the actual materials themselves, and making sure that we're not working with toxic materials, because not only are they having an impact on those that construct them, but they also construct with them, but they also have an impact on people who then consequently live in the buildings containing those materials, create incredibly poor air quality conditions. And it's a real unspoken issue, the issue of indoor air quality in contemporary materials. But yes, also in kind of labour conditions, and one of the things that we toy with, but our work isn't able to have any direct impact, at least not at the moment, but it is the idea of really leaning into these kind of modern methods of construction and being able to do things off-site in order to improve working conditions. You can have spaces that are really well ventilated, that have proper extraction, that are safe, that are dry, that potentially also promote different kinds of culture on a building site, that could be more accepting of greater diversity also of builder. It's a very predominantly kind of white and male industry, and has relatively kind of toxic cultures, which are kind of evident in the very sadly high suicide rates among builders. And all of that can change and should change, and I think would also change the way that we build and the kinds of buildings that are possible.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that quite a lot recently in terms of just the size of materials, like a 18mm sheet of ply, is a big ungainly weight, and not everyone can lift one, and certainly can't lift them safely or put them down safely, which is often the sort of issue. And so just sizing materials, or to be accessible for people, for the whole range of people, rather than just your sort of archetypal big burly builder.
Yeah, or also building cultures of support and working together on site, where it'd be assumed. I think it would be better for everyone that a sheet of 18mm ply is carried by two people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I imagine there's a lot of performing of strength also, which ultimately isn't going to be great for body down the line, particularly when it's an awkward load like carrying a sheet of ply on your own. There's a lot of things that would only take very simple adjustments, like halving the size of the sheet, or those little cultural shifts, but that would have, I think, a really massive impact. So we're trying to do a bit of that work. We've got a project called Material Cultures Make, or MC Make, which is kind of open to everyone, but I think with the hope that we also get trying to draw in people in kind of conventional construction, and introduce different types of material. Still construction colleges just teach concrete block and brick and clay tiles, and these materials which we're teaching the next generation, but really we can't afford to be using anymore. Doesn't really make sense. So we're hoping to kind of plug some of that gap, and it feels like what we're doing at the moment. We did a kind of trial year last year, and we've got another year where we're kind of going to develop from that this year. But as much as anything, I think what we're trying to develop is kind of how we hold that space and how you create a different kind of environment for that learning to be something that's reciprocal, rather than just us being instructive, that we also learn as people holding the teaching space, and really responsive and open, and then with the hope that we'll kind of develop a kind of form of curriculum, but that will ideally encompass not just the content, but the kind of cultural reframing.
I was just talking to a friend of mine about, he's an MVQ instructor evaluator, and he was saying, most of the MVQ level 3 is health and safety. It's like, health and safety could be such a broad topic in terms of mental health and, carrying sheets of ply between two people and all of that kind of cultural stuff. It would be great to have that actually taught and reinforced.
Yeah, absolutely. It just seems like a no-brainer in a way. But I think in an internal quandary about whether we should be just going directly to MBQ and trying to change the syllabus, or be working on the outside and inviting people into a different kind of world. it's kind of a perennial question for all the work that we do in a way. Is are we prefiguring a different way of doing things, and therefore maybe having less compromise but working on a smaller scale? Or are we trying to interact with the kind of mainstream systems and therefore probably having to dilute a lot of what we do, but maybe having a broader impact? And I don't think we've decided which way necessarily, but I mean, the cultural stuff feels really important, and I think that's where it feels easier, at least for now, to sit on the outside until we know exactly what it is. Feel very clear and confident about what that is, and then I think maybe we can take that somewhere.
I feel like those systems, sort of the MVQ type systems, are they're quite well set. I think I've heard of various people trying to sort of get in and, you know, make them better in sort of whichever way, and come up against quite a hard struggle. That's not to say, that's probably more reason to say that it should be done, isn't it? I feel your struggle on that. I'd be interested to see where you end up going. So what the MC make?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a real issue with perception around these materials, and often it's generally completely misplaced, as you say. So I don't know. I mean, Tom Woolley, who is a prolific author around natural materials, would say that there's been a very active kind of smear campaign on the front of the concrete and steel and everything else industries in order to kind of suppress natural materials. And I don't know whether that's true or not, but I think there's maybe also more just a kind of broader cultural idea of problematic ideas of kind of primitivism associated with direct, simple, natural and unprocessed materials, and that modernism has allowed us to escape that form of kind of primitive existence, and we're now living in these technologically sophisticated, better buildings, and with better systems and better materials, because they are the result of industrialized processes. And unfortunately, that's all rubbish. So there needs to be a new smear campaign. It's a real shame, because I think it's been really effective, this idea, what I associate with modernism idea, that new and industrialized systems are better, materials are better. In most cases, they can be demonstrated not to be. I think, yes, there is absolutely a place for concrete, steel and glass and aluminium, and all of those materials are incredible. They have extraordinary value, and enabling of really important things. I think we just need to be much more careful about how we use them as well and where. I think plastic-based materials, I basically think should be completely eliminated, apart from maybe in very specific medical context, where there is nothing else that would do the job. Mainly because they just have such a toxic, the once they are in the supply chain in the built world. It's almost impossible to remove them, and they just become pollutants. But yeah, I don't know how we tell these new stories, but I think they need to be told. That we're seeing it all around us. The kind of fact that most contemporary buildings are mold incubating, and the materials that we've retrofitted historic buildings with have created now terrifying consequences in terms of mold. Also, the issue of concrete and rebar and steel, rusting rebar in schools across the country. All of these materials that are meant to be, panacea, or are meant to have brought us great achievements, that just are failing and causing a lot of problems. So,
well, I think it's interesting at the moment because Kingspan have just released announced a hemp product, a hemp bat, and so it sort of went hand in hand with me posting pictures of what I was doing, and then I saw Kingspan release their thing, and I was reading some of the comments on their LinkedIn posts, and it was it's all the same things. But they've got millions, billions to spend on promoting this stuff, so it feels like it feels like a very difficult time for me, because I've been very anti Kingspan, and now suddenly they're doing what seems like a good thing, and it's confusing my brain as to whether I like them or not. But yeah, it feels like there's going to be a very big push for making these products normal and dealing with all these sort of perception ideas.
Yeah, and I think Kingspan have also just bought Styco, which is a fibre-based insulation manufacturer. Yeah, so it's happening. I mean, all this, exactly. And it is a kind of conflictual feeling, unfortunately, because we know that they're a completely socially irresponsible organisation, and that was demonstrated through Grenfell. So it is difficult watching an organisation like that move into a space in which there have been many people working very, very, very earnestly for a very long time, and manufacturers like Indie Nature in Scotland, who we know that they're motivated very genuinely by kind of ecology and broader sustainability of product and what they're doing. And it's hard not to see it as a cynical, money-making move on the part of Kingspan, but at the same time, it's the only thing that's actually going to make change happen on the scale that it needs to. So it's also very exciting. It's really,
it's so confusing. I don't know where to stand.
But yeah, I mean, it's a real signal, isn't it, that the things that we've been talking about and advocating for some time are kind of stepping up a gear, and that mainstreaming is happening. But I guess the question then becomes ever more important, this issue of, in what, keep on coming back to culture, but what cultures are going along with that change, because if we can substitute out the high carbon materials and substitute in lower carbon materials, and that will have a big impact, but it will also leave a lot of other issues remaining, and other issues which I would argue this material transition is a real opportunity for change in also. So, for example, how the plants that are going into that product are cultivated. Is it through an industrialized monocrop system with no crop rotation, in which the soils are essentially being degenerated and there is no habitat creation and da, da, da. And if so, that is only actually serving to further kind of ecological destruction. So in our minds, it really absolutely does need to go hand in hand. The move towards regenerative agriculture or agroecological farming and plant or bio-based materials. And if they're not happening hand in hand, then that's a real problem. And it needs to also, the transition also needs to happen in quite a strategic way. We need to be thinking about where things are grown, at what quantities, what the impact is on food systems, for example. The idea that the kind of economy will work these things out well or equitably, I think is naive and increasingly being shown to be unrealistic. And I think the government does recognise it in they've just put out a policy or a statement around how they're approaching timber, forestry and construction, with an awareness there that there will need to be centralised governmental strategy and planting in order to reach those targets. And one of the things we keep on coming back to also in our work is I guess, a need for broader land reform, and that kind of underpinning almost everything that we end up talking about, that so many of these issues come back to how land is managed in this country and more broadly in Europe at least, and that it's held very inequitably, it's financialized in a way that is kind of highly unproductive for society, and also in a way which kind of encourages a very, very particular form of industrialized agriculture that is completely unsustainable. So it's been really exciting for us, I think, really understanding how linked the future trajectories of architecture and agriculture are, because it feels like there's a real opportunity for quite a strong coalition there, in terms of those voices coming together. And also to give architecture a new direction, and a purpose that is about, trying to listen to and align to ecology and its needs, and really tune into that. So for us now, every project begins with looking at the landscape and trying to understand what it needs, and then what that might mean in terms of kind of co-outputs. We believe in the ability of humans to coexist with other species and to design and manage living systems that are really healthy but also productive. We don't sit in the kind of rewilding camp, or at least that doesn't feel like a realistic way forward, given the number of people that there are in this country and the demand that there is going to need to be on the land that we have. And humans have lived for many, many centuries in kind of this managed coexistence with other species, and in very sustainably. It's only really in the last 100 years that it's gone so far out of kilter. So I think that's the project of the work that we do, and yeah, in the way, the deeper we go, the further away we get from the mainstream. But maybe you do just leave that to Kingsman. And find out where we can be useful on the edges, but it's as I said, that's a kind of ongoing question for us, like where we should sit. We're also working on large development projects. So we're involved in a 700 home development in the south of England.
Is that the Phoenix project?
The Phoenix project, yeah, in Lewis.
Love that. I'm so excited about that.
Yeah, it's such
Please, tell us more about it.
Yeah, it's an amazing and incredibly ambitious development project that's been led by an organisation called Human Nature Places, who are a developer, but very unconventional developer. In that they have just come with a set of really progressive ideas, and they've managed to bring the entire, well, not the entire, but a large proportion of the community of Lewis along with them on the journey of working out what that site might be. And 10 years ago, or around 10 years ago, there were massive protests in Lewis against a kind of former iteration with a very different developer version of this development. And then a month ago, there were public protests in favour of the proposals going through planning, which was, is extraordinary. I've never seen a protest in favour of a development. Unheard of.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really exciting project. There's so many elements to it. There's no private car use on site. It's a very large area. There's a depot from which you collect your post, rather than it being distributed very inefficiently to every door. There is a real mix of housing and working places and healthcare and other community or local and social infrastructure, which often, again, doesn't accompany development. And then the work that we're doing is to design 70 units, residential units. And we are looking to work with exclusively timber from the region, from the southeast and from effectively, potentially from the kind of valleys around Lewis. And then we are also hoping to work with hempcrete, but the idea is to use the site itself as a kind of micro factory. So it was an industrial site, so there are a lot of large sheds, and we would convert a couple of those into small production facilities in which we would prefabricate components for the buildings.
Brilliant. Oh. All right. Thank you, Paloma. That was brilliant. I don't know if you can hear outside, but there's a big old storm raging in the UK right now, and I am sheltering under a little pile of sofa cushions, trying to create the most deadened sound area. So there's a fun image for you. There's a towel draped over my head. So what did I want to say? Oh, the cultural shift around lifting. So I brought up the sheets of ply because on the job I'm on at the moment, we just had a delivery of sheets of ply, and there was a delivery guy who was anxious to get off, and we just needed to get stuff inside. The weather wasn't great, and so we just kind of hauled them in on our own, sheets of 18mm ply. And it's funny because So when I was running Heartwin, for those that don't know, we'd get a group of 10 people that might not have ever been on a work site before, usually not, and we would build a whole house with them from foundations right through to finishes. And so part of that was instilling really good worksite culture. And one of the things I'm most proud of actually is a thing we just called lifting friends. And that was whenever you had to carry a sheet of ply or a bucket full of mix, you could just look up and say, "Can I get a lifting friend?" And someone would be there to help you. And we didn't have anyone hauling stuff around on their own or hurting their backs or anything like that. And it was a really simple thing to instill in people who were learning it for the first time. And it was so second nature to everyone, including myself, although I didn't learn that when I was first on building sites. So it's interesting that now I'm back sort of running my own jobs, working with just me and Mike, who you'll know from the Christmas podcast. How when you're not looking after a group's well-being, it can sometimes slip a little bit. Yeah, a good reminder to look after ourselves. So that's lifting. I wanted to tell you just a little story about a faux pas that I made. I like to think of myself as a pretty knowledgeable guy in terms of natural building product. I know sort of the good ones and the slightly questionable ones that we were okay with because there's nothing really better. There's a product called wood wool board, and it's sort of like, looks like strips of paper. It's a dark grey. It's 1 metre by 0.5 metre, small panels, and you screw them to the wall and then you can plaster on top of them. Now the issue with these boards is that where two boards join, if it joins on an unsupported area, then you get a little bit of flex, and that tends to come through the plaster and cause a crack. Now normally we'd deal with this by just having timbers behind all of our joins, sizing everything so it's the boards are supported, and this uses a bit more timber and is a bit more work. I had seen on a site I was doing a floor on that someone had used a little bit of glue between the boards, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. And when I ordered my next batch of those the wood wall boards, I specified some of the glue, and when we were putting the boards up, I sprayed around the edges. It comes in a little sort of squeezy tube thing. I sprayed it in around the edges. We fixed our boards up, and we sort of did a whole wall, didn't really think too much of it, and then started doing another wall. And it was then I turned back and looked at our first wall, and all of that spray had kind of ballooned up, and it became very evident that I had just used spray foam to stick my boards together. And regular listeners will know that spray foam is pretty much the antithesis of natural building. It's the thing that is usually used as a sort of joke when we're trying to find the right solution. It's always, just spray foam it. Ha ha ha, we'd never do that. Imagine how upset I was with myself when I realised I'd just used spray foam on these boards. And I hadn't even realised. It was actually the first time I've ever used spray foam. That's why I didn't pick up on it. So yes, Jeffrey, the spray foam builder, will be my new website. Ugh. And it just goes to show that you just need to be really on it when you're looking at materials. I talked to Will Stanix about the using of that material. He did rationalise that there's less wastage because we didn't have to cut boards to be over the timbers. Yeah, there is a point to that, I guess, but it doesn't feel good. So there you go. Maybe I have made that mistake so you don't have to. Right, that's the end of story time. Links, there are loads of links in the show notes. There is a link to Will Stanix, he got a mention. He's actually going to be on a podcast very soon. We record an episode in a fantastic barn project that he's been doing. There's links to the building sustainability episodes with George and Summer. There is the magnesium oxide. There's a link to a page about that. Material Cultures Make. Indie Nature hemp bats. I love those bats. Use those on our project before I spray foamed them. There is a link to the Tom Woolley's book. That's a fantastic book. Natural Building Techniques, a guide to ecological methods and materials. A link to Styco, and a link to the Phoenix Project, the Human Nature Places fantastic project down in Lewis. Oh, a reminder, there is a reminder to subscribe if this is your first episode. If you're looking for something to listen to next, I'd head on over to the episode with George and Summer about hemp building. Please do share this episode. It takes just a couple of seconds to share it via WhatsApp or your favourite social media. It's really, really appreciated. And if you really appreciate this podcast, find it useful, entertaining, or something else that I couldn't think of, then please do consider supporting via the Patreon. That is patreon.com/building sustainability. There's a link in the show notes. It helps me out so much, and you get bonus episodes and little snippets from different guests. So up at around 10 or 11 hours worth now. Okay. That is it from me. I think the next episode with Paloma rolls kind of right on from this. So some of the sort of themes are continued. It will stand alone if you can't listen now. It's only about half an hour. So enjoy that if you're going straight on. Otherwise, if you're leaving us now, have a safe day. Have a lovely day. I hope you're enjoying just that little bit more sunlight every day. It's definitely making me feel pretty happy that spring's on the way. And the snowdrops they're out, which is definitely a little signal that spring is on the way. Okay, that's it for me. Until next time, bye-bye.